Good afternoon and welcome to the Assembly of Osteopathic Graduate Medical Educators, or AOGME's webinar, showcasing an innovative talent assessment tool. My name is Alenta Long and I serve as the Executive Director of AOGME. We are very pleased to have Mr. Keith Jenkins from the Oniro Group as our featured speaker today. To learn more about AOGME or our webinars that take place monthly, please visit us at acom.org/AOGME. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted on the AOGME's webinars webpage shortly. All webinar participants are now in listen-only mode. If you experience technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat feature and raise your hand and we will assist you. If you have questions for our presenter during the webinar, please feel free to submit them anytime through the Q&A feature. If time remains, questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. I'll now very briefly introduce our speaker today. Keith L. Jenkins has 29 years of work experience as a human resources professional, working in 6 different industries. He's a social entrepreneur that currently serves as the president of the Oniro Group, a human resources and leadership performance laboratory devoted to optimizing human performance in the workplace. Mr. Jenkins has extensive experience in human resources areas, such as diversity and inclusion, talent acquisition, employee engagement, employee separations, workforce development, leadership coaching, and performance management. Prior to launching Oniro Group, Mr. Jenkins served 9 years at Kettering Health Network and other organizations in the Dayton, Ohio region, including Reynolds & Reynolds, Merrill Lynch, Dayton VA Medical Center, and Creative Memories. Mr. Jenkins is a certified Society of Human Resources Management, Senior Certified Professional. We are so pleased to have Mr. Jenkins join us today, and now I'll turn it over to Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Alenta. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to be here. And I'm already not, okay, I think I just saw it, Andrew. There we go. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I want to jump right into it because we have about an hour and we have a lot to get through. And I understand that the issue right now is basically that we need a better method of selecting candidates and residents due to the COVID situation where we can't be face-to-face and in person for our interviewing process. So like Alenta mentioned, I spent 9 years at Kettering Health Network as Director of Human Resources and their Network Inclusion Officer. And I also specifically worked at Grandview Medical Center where I served the human resources needs for the Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine through Ohio University, which, you know, basically had about 134 residents year-round, at least 15 programs. A great program where I really got a lot of great experience working with medical residents. Now for me, I worked very closely with those residents that were behaving badly. So I got to know them very well, and many times I would be called in to kind of help mitigate some of the risk that would be involved in separations of residents. And it's I understand that process and have very dear friends that I connected with there because when someone has invested that much time, energy, and money, and then they can't make it in the residency program, it's a real travesty. So making the right selection is critical for medical residents. Now, our quick review of our itinerary. We'll review our admission requirements. You know, we'll go over what is the 3 C's of human potential, what's the process, and trustable professional activities and how they will merge into the process, debriefing with the 3 C's, DISC personality assessment, intercultural development inventory. So I'm going to throw everything at you for this because you need as much data as you can to make the right selection for your programs. We'll do a summary, a Q&A, which will include the next steps. So I went out to the website and I wanted to just use this as an example of how we can build of how we can build a comprehensive model to see a person that we don't know very well. So the 3 C's are character, competence, and chemistry. And I learned this method about almost 20 years ago, about 17 years ago. One of my bosses, Chandra Attikin, she would say that to me, always make sure you get those 3. And so over the years, I've been able to build a program and a talent acquisition model that would make the best of this investment, because people are an investment in your organization. They're not an expense, they're an investment. And when we don't select right and put the right people in the right roles, then you really lose money on that investment, and we waste money on that investment. So getting the right person at the right time. Now, when I was at Grandview, we used this method to hire a vice president, a position of like the chief medical officer. And then I used this method to hire 18 nurse manager and nurse directors. So that manager director level in nursing leadership, we made 18 hires. And I don't think we had one that did not make it for at least 3 years. And so in today's market, you want to make sure that you're able to at least keep a person 2 to 3 years if you can. You don't want to lose a person in 6 months or less than a year. You're going to waste money that way. And especially with this medical residency, there's so much investment there. We want to make sure we do the right thing. So even though these admission requirements may not be the same requirements we use for the residency program, I'm just using it as an example for the model. You can use any type of requirement that you would like in there, but this is just an example of the model and how the model works. So when you go out on the website and see the admission requirements for medical school, you see we use the GPA. We use the pre-MCAT, or the MCAT, the mean MCAT score. We use the new MCAT score. We use previous education. We use in-state versus out-of-state. We use letters of recommendation, criminal background checks. And then we use personal qualities. And all these put together, they help determine and help us make the right choice and right selection for either a medical school student, or you can use it for a medical resident if we change some of those requirements. The one that is most interesting to me is the personal qualities, because when we look at these personal qualities, we're going to come back to them a little later on in the presentation, and we're going to kind of test your ability to determine whether or not if this is a competency-based quality or a transactional or ambiguous quality. Now, when I say competency-based, that's going to be very important in the 3 C's of human potential, because of course this model has been developed and used so that we can get to know a person without knowing them and knowing if they can fit the role. Now, when I said what are the 3 C's, the 3 C's, as I mentioned earlier, character, competence, and chemistry. Now, when we break that down, when we say character, we're not talking about, and this is a very important part to remember, we're not talking about are they a good person or a bad person when we talk about character. What we're talking about is, are there any red flags that you experienced when you interviewed that person? Any kind of red flag. Maybe you didn't like their hairstyle. Maybe there was something that they said or a behavior that they made, a behavior that they exhibited, or a face that they made, or a comment that they made that just didn't sit well with you. We're going to talk about that in our debriefing situation and our debriefing session, so that we can kind of unearth the intuitive parts of the process. Competence is just what it says. It's the combination and application of knowledge, skill, and abilities. And so we know what competence is. Chemistry is very, very important, because it's really understanding how that person fits with the team, with the hiring leaders, leadership style, with the mission, vision, and values of the organization, and the culture and subcultures that may exist within the organization. So keep that in mind. We're going to go over that more and more as we go through the presentation, but character, competence, and chemistry makes up the 3 C's. Now, I'm going to show you the process twice. So I'm going to show you the process at the beginning, and then after we fill in some of the blanks and fill in some of the information, then we can revisit it and go more deeply into and look at the process at a more granular level. So at this point, we're looking at prioritizing the domains of competence or competency as outlined in the entrustable professional activities, the EPAs, identifying specific competencies. Then we're aligning the behavioral-based interviewing competencies and questions with those that we identify from the domain of competence, or the docs. I'm just going to use the acronyms there if that's okay. I think we all know what they are now, EPAs and docs. Then we may or may not, depending on your preference, source the candidates, determine who's on the bubble, and screen some of the candidates so that we can put them and rank them in order in how we want to interview them. Then we select a group of interviewers that will comprise a diversified array of stakeholders. So we want to, this is a very, very important aspect because we want to make sure that we have the collective energies, the collective experiences of individuals, and using them and working harmoniously all together to ascertain whether or not this person is going to fit our environment. We're going to debrief, and that's where we all meld our minds together and make that determination, and then we're going to score it out. So now this is just a preliminary. Now I'm going to go through this more granularly, and I'm going to go from entrustable professional activities and then work our way down to how they actually align and interact with the behavioral-based interviewing questions and competencies. So many of you probably already know this, and you know it better than I do. I'm not a professional when it comes to entrustable professional activities. I love this model. I love this model because it's competency-based. The 3 C's, it's competency-based. And that's why I think we can marry these together to help us make that best decision, even though we don't have that in-person, face-to-face interaction with an individual. So in case you are not familiar with entrustable professional activities, or EPAs, it's a systemic approach to assure that students are prepared for the residency training, and it's competency-based. And so we're going to talk more about this and create some of the definitions for you to learn from. So competency in this realm is an observable ability of a health professional integrating multiple components such as knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes, as you can see on the screen. Since competencies are observable, they can be measured and assessed to ensure their acquisition. So that's the wonderful thing about a competency. We can test you as you perform and see if you actually possess that competency. Now the EPA, that's a unit of professional practice as defined as tasks, responsibilities that trainees are entrusted to perform unsupervised once they have attained sufficient specific competence. EPAs are independently executable, observable, and measurable in their process and outcome, and therefore suitable for entrustment decisions. I just think your work is just so important, and it's just wonderful. You're building physicians of the future, and it's just such an important work at all levels in society. And of course, then we have milestones. So that milestone is a behavioral descriptor that marks a level of performance for a given competency. So people know where they are, and you know where they are, and they know where they are, and then we can make adjustments from there to ensure that they can fully possess that competency. Now, one last note, that EPAs and competencies are not mutually exclusive. To the contrary, EPAs by definition require the integration of competencies. And as we well noted here, competencies are best assessed in the context of performance. Now, as we look at there are 13 EPAs, and let's look at them. Now, the AAMC and ACOM both have the same, so we're all on the same page here for these standards. So EPA 1, gather a history and perform a physical examination prioritize a differential diagnosis following a clinical encounter. I'll just keep going down. You can read them and you can see what they are as I put them up. And you see that there are 13 of them, and they set the tone and they set the stage for this performance. And we know that if we have competencies and then we have milestones within each of these units, we will be able to assess whether or not or how much that particular individual possesses the ability to perform those tasks. Now, those 13 tasks are really guided by 8 domains of competency. So we're going to look at those very quickly. So now you can see that it starts to kind of get a little more granular on what are the competencies. So it's another bucket: osteopathic principles and practices, medical knowledge, patient care, interpersonal and communication skills, professionalism. So we can see that now the 13 are really based on these domains. Now, for us to get even more granular, what we want to do, we can start to see the whole picture right here. And as you see here, you can see that we're on EPA number 7. And you can see that here. And it's kind of blocking my screen. I can't, you can see it, I can't see it, but you see number 7 there, and you see that we have a description of the activity, which this is what I love. It really outlines exactly what needs to be done so that resident really can understand what is expected of them. Then it's very helpful here where it tells us what are the most relevant docs or domains of competence. And you see here that 2 are marked here for EPA number 7. And then it tells us which competencies within the domain of competency actually applies to this particular EPA. So we know that PC4, PBLI1, PBLI2, those are more specific competencies that we know that reside in the domain of competency, and that links to the EPA. Now I'm going to get a little more granular. Now we're going to see how this looks when it's kind of, I guess we can see it kind of plotted out here. So you can see that our entrustable or EPAs are here, represented here, 1 through 13. Then we see here, like number 6, practice-based learning and improvement. That is a domain of competence. And then we see right here, that is the specific competence within the domain that we can say applies to EPA 7. So in this particular situation, in this particular EPA, you can see that under 7, all 5 of these competencies apply to EPA number 7. So what does that look like? So we have under the PBLI, or practice-based learning and improvement, it's more granularly laid out for you, where now it starts to describe more of the competency-based expectations. So when we see here, let's take number 2 since it's shorter, evaluate the relevance and validity of clinical research. Or number 4, critically evaluate medical information and its sources. So if we wanted to measure a person's critical thinking skills, we know that under number 4, we know that critical thinking skills are necessary for this particular EPA. So it's necessary for a resident to perform at an acceptable level of performance. And so therefore, once we can kind of identify, well, what is that exact competence? Now we can start to link it to our behavioral-based interview competencies, and then we have questions that go along with those that are already pre-made that we can select from. Now, before I get to that next granular level, I wanted to kind of test you a little bit. And And these are the personal qualities that we talked about earlier when we were talking about competencies. And what I'd like for you to do, so what I'd like for you to do is, you see our little smiley faces down here. So if you get a smile, that's a competency-based personal quality. If it's a transactional situation where it's not really a personal quality, it's more of a transaction, then we have the straight face. Then if it's just ambiguous, we have the sad face. So I'm going to ask you the question, and then I'm going to show you which one of the three smiley faces represent that particular personal quality as we have them laid out. So number one, it says are well-rounded. So do you think that's competency-based, transactional, or ambiguous? That's ambiguous, because someone is well-rounded. What does that actually mean? How is that a personal quality? It's not a personal quality. I guess it's several mixed together, but it's kind of ambiguous. We're not really sure what that means. Number two, demonstrate strong communication and interpersonal skills. So which one do you think that is? I'll give you a couple seconds. That is a competency-based personal quality, because we can test you on your communication and interpersonal skills. We can test you on that. Number three, have a record of community service. Which of the three do you think that is? Transactional. Have a record of leadership. Transactional. Have some clinical experience. Transactional. Have participated in a variety of extracurricular activities. Transactional. Come from diverse backgrounds. Transactional. Are motivated to pursue a career in osteopathic medicine. Competency-based, and it's competency-based because when we say motivated, that can also translate into initiative or initiating action, which is a personal quality. Possess knowledge of osteopathic medicine. It's transactional because we're just possessing the knowledge. Have shadowed an osteopathic physician. So that's transactional as well. So you can see that we need to be very clear, like when we don't know a person, right? We need to be very clear on these competencies, because we can get mixed up. 70% of this list is transactional, meaning that 70% of the questions, let's say you built questions off of this, you really wouldn't get to know that person very well. So what I'd like to present to you are some competency-based qualities, just as an example, and just compare the two lists and see how they're different. So number one, initiating action. Yeah, that's a competency. Managing conflict, building strategic work relationships, ability to energize others, the ability to gain commitment, adaptability, planning and organizing, critical thinking ability, ability to demonstrate empathy, and cultural sensitivity. When we take these two lists and compare them, so if someone, did extremely well here, we may not really know that person, but here we know that person extremely well. And we have a much better chance of making sure we have the right person selected. Now, we're going to take as an example of, now we're at the point where we're trying to marry the EPA, the competencies, with the behavioral-based interviewing competencies. So this is an example of some questions that we would use. So let's say we were looking at gaining commitment and looking at that as a competency and taking these questions from behavioral-based interviewing. This is what some of the questions would look like. So sometimes we have to work under new policies we don't agree with. Tell me about the last time you disagreed with the new policy or procedure instituted by senior management. How did you respond? Now, of course, you can come up with any question that you want. It's just that BBI, they already have these questions made out, so it makes it a lot easier. And then you can add on your other questions, so it gives you a quicker way to come up with questions. In the BBI format, behavioral-based interviewing format, there's a way that we communicate to the candidate and how we want them to answer these types of questions. So that's referring here, and it's called the STAR method. And the STAR method really we want that candidate to explain a situation that responds or correlates to the question, tell us about a task that was done, and then what action you took as an individual, and then tell us what is the result, or what was the result of your action. So when we have people answer in that method, it helps us ascertain more quickly whether or not this person possesses the competency that we're trying to identify. Another example of a question would be, not everyone agrees with our decisions. Tell me about an unpopular decision you made and how you gained acceptance from others. Another example of a question would be, leaders often have opportunities to foster positive relationships at work. Give me an example of a time when you did this. So we're not saying that these are the only questions that you can ask, but it's kind of laid out for us, and it makes it a little easier to add our other questions. Now, we also know in this situation, we build our core questions from the competencies, and then we make sure that every candidate is asked the exact same core questions. We don't want to change the core. You can ask other questions that spin off from there, or that may just come to mind in the interview, but you always want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples and giving individuals the opportunity to answer the same core questions. Now we're going to look back at our process once again and look at it a little more granularly. So when we're prioritizing our domains of competencies, we review the 8 EPAs, the 8 DOCs, and prioritize them in order of importance that relates to your program's mission, vision, team dynamic, and leadership styles. Which ones are most important to you out of the 8? And you rank them. Now, they're all important because a resident will need to exhibit all of those qualities. But which ones are most important to you? Then secondly, we're going to identify the specific competencies. So once we figure out what the 8 are, now we're going to look within each of those 8 and see the particular competencies that we can pull out, because we want to pull those competencies out so that we can marry them and align them with our behavioral-based interviewing competencies, and therefore we'll have more questions that we can ask. We can align them with the correlated questions to make it easier to build and more quickly build the platform for which we will ask questions during the interview process. Then number 4, this is where you can screen candidates based on any transactional admission requirements. You can rank them, you can do whatever you want. You may not want to use this particular step in the process, but I just have it in there in case you need it. One thing that I really like to do when I'm interviewing people, let's say when I rank out the priority of competencies, then I'll take the top 3 or 4 competencies, and then I'll say, if a person does not possess these top 3, then I don't move on them. I will not allow them to move forward, because you gotta have these 3. Anything after that, you have to be willing to create learning and training development plans around them. But I want to make sure that people are really strong in these top 3. because that really fits my team or my team dynamic or the organizational culture. So that's why that part is very important and how we select that out and what's most important to us and our team. Then we come to the peer interview, and this is where the magic starts to happen, because since we don't know this person as well as we would like, we need the collective minds of key stakeholders to make sure that we can use all of their life experiences, and then we meld them all together. So we want as many people as we can, not too many. I've had these peer interviews. I've had 18 people in one. The poor candidates were scared to death, but we had that many, at one time. I like having 3 to 4, sometimes 6, 7. In that peer interview process, once we conduct our questions and we ask our questions and we interview the candidates, then we take those notes and now we're ready to debrief. So the peer interview is where we can collectively use our minds harmoniously to examine this person, okay, from a critical thinking point of view, from all aspects that we can see with major stakeholders. And now it's time to debrief. And when we debrief, the facilitator, I usually facilitate these where I can guide the conversation. Now, the next slide here tells you about how that process works. And so when we start the debriefing, what we want to do is, number one over here, we provide each interviewer with a cell phone number that they can text their responses, and you'll understand why that's important in a few minutes. Then number two, the facilitator is going to lead a discussion with the panel in the peer interviewing team, and we're going to discuss each C individually per candidate. So let's say we have candidate number one, and now let's say I'm facilitating the session and we have our interviewers there. I'm going to go to the board and I'm going to say, okay, this is what character is, any red flags. So what do you think? Tell me what you think from the interview process. What red flags did you experience? If I don't get enough, I'm going to keep asking and trying to dig it out of our folks that are there. And then once we start to talk about that, in many cases, from my experience, one person sees it one way, another person sees it a different way. And that's what we want. We want people to be able to speak freely and not hold things in. We want you just to say what you mean and let us know what your thoughts are. And then we have healthy, respectable debate about it. And then once we have that debate, once we conclude with the debate, then I have each interviewer will anonymously vote. So they'll take their cell phone and they'll either send me a plus sign or they will send me a minus sign. Once everyone has voted, or the facilitator will take the count and tally the votes, and then it'll start to look like this. We're going to start to build out a way for us to not necessarily quantify, but we will qualify. And it's a method that we can use, a formula that we can come up with that means different things based on how it scores out. So for these two particular candidates, you can see, let's say, take candidate number one. So when we talked about character, what this means, we had 7 people that were, that interviewed this particular candidate. And after we talked about character, what this means is that 4 of the people texted in plus signs, 3 texted in minus signs. Therefore, it's a plus sign for that particular candidate under character. For competence, you see that more texted a minus sign than the plus, so that person gets a minus sign there. And then you can see how it goes from there for chemistry. And then you can see the same thing for candidate 2. Now, I've done this for many, many years. So after all of these years, now I can start to see from this little formula and how this works out, and knowing how people work out after we hire them, I kind of know what combinations work best. And so, out of these two candidates, which do you think is the better candidate based on their scores here? I just gave you a second to think about that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about how these two candidates compare. Now, candidate number one, there's some interesting stuff here. They did have a good character as far as there weren't as many red flags. It was more people were satisfied than not, but you had a 4-3, it almost split. So it is a plus sign, but I would be a little leery there, but it is a plus sign. Chemistry, they had another plus sign, 5-2. Overwhelmingly, the group felt that this person would be a great fit for the team and for the company and for the mission and vision and values. However, they didn't feel like this person was competent enough and was lacking in competence. Candidate number two, when we look at candidate number two, we see that character, they did fine. There weren't any major red flags. It was 6-1. So most people thought, hey, no major red flags here. Competence, they all thought this person was highly competent. However, there was a split decision almost on chemistry, which made a minus sign. From my experience, candidate number two is not the better candidate. Candidate number one is the better candidate. And why? Why do we say that? Because this is just based on my experience. If a candidate has a negative in character, they don't normally make it because you have a big red flag that doesn't go away. Just when you see a red flag, rarely does it go away. It just gets bigger as you get to know the person more. A minus sign in chemistry means that they really just don't fit. When people don't fit, they don't do as well. Others don't help them as much. On candidate number one, we know that there are no major red flags, even though it was almost a split decision there, but we know that this person fits very well. The question becomes, can we teach them and can they learn? And many times, if you have good character, the good chemistry, you can teach them depending on how far they are on the learning curve. So now that's the 3 C's. Now I'm going to add on a couple of other things very quickly because I know I don't have I'm doing pretty good on time. So these are some other ways, since you don't have that opportunity to meet face to face, these are some other things that you can add on to our EPAs and our 3 C's. DISC, I don't know how many of you have heard of DISC. I love DISC. It's, it's been compared to Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, Human-X, so it's basically a behavioral difference. It teaches you about an individual's preferences and their behavioral differences. And they base it off of these competencies here: action, enthusiasm, collaboration, support, stability, accuracy, challenge, and results. And as you see, the way that it's colored in, it shows you what you have the most of based on how you answered their questions. This dot tells you exactly where you are. So for this individual, they're right on the line. So they would be an SI. So that the S would be a major, which is stability. I'm sorry, it's not stability, but that's steadiness. I'll tell you what DISC actually, the acronym is for. Let me go to that right now, then I'll come back. The D is for dominant, the I is for influencer, the S is for steadiness, and the C is for conscientious. And so the dominant person is that person that they're more domineering, they make decisions more quickly, they're more results oriented. The I is that person you see, they're very active, they're enthusiastic, and they like to collaborate. So those are people. Then you have your steadiness people where they like to collaborate and they like to support others. And they have that stability is important to them. Then for the C and the conscientious, you see that they're your more detail-oriented people where they're a little more skeptical and they like to know the facts and they like to know details. Now, I really like using this model. Anytime that I have a new team, I always have a facilitator come in because it helps me to get to know people. Now, these are actual scores from my team. The names have been changed to protect the innocent or the guilty. And I put my score on here so I can talk about it individually and to show you how much this really helped me. You all may be really familiar with it, so I'm sorry if I'm being redundant, but I love to use DISC, and it's a good way to get to understand how a person works. So you have these competencies, results, action, enthusiasm, on down the line, and then you see how much a person has. Well, when the team looked at mine and stability was so low, it kind of scared everybody. And so we were asking, since I scored so low in stability, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm not a stable person? What it actually means is that I don't require a lot of stability in structure to get things done. Meaning that, like when I started our business here, we had to refurbish our building. The building was a mess. No one had been here, it had been abandoned for 4 or 5 years. Paint chipping, ceiling falling in, carpet is torn, holes in the wall. But I had a table and a desk, a chair. It was wintertime and my heating didn't work at that time. I didn't have a good HVAC system. I had to have a space heater, and I had my computer and I could work fine. I had no problem working in that environment. Actually, I worked just as much as I work now that everything is looking great. So I don't need that stability, but others may need that stability. And it helped me to make sure that I provided enough structure for others, even though I don't require it. And before I did this test, I did not know that I did not recognize that in myself. So it helped me tremendously. Now, another component to add is the IDI and the Intercultural Development Inventory. A very good colleague of mine for many, many years, almost 2 decades, Dr. Chris Wildermuth, she's an associate professor of education and organizational leadership at Drake University in Iowa. And we're buddies. She teaches this thing, and I love this thing, and it helps you measure the cultural sensitivity of an individual. And Dr. Bennett, many, many years ago, came up with this model. And I love this model because it takes you, when you first take this test, it shows you where you are on this continuum. You're either in denial or you're in adaptation. The average person, when they take this test, they're going to be denial and polarization. Then what Dr. Wildermuth does is that she will work individually with that person to help them get to this place of adaptation. I love this. It's a great way to understand cultural sensitivity and biases, which we need today so much. So it's another add-on. These things they do cost, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw them. Now, when you start to put the whole comprehensive model together with the 3 C's, and you can see how they're color-coded here, character, competence, and chemistry. I look at these 3 of competence, like in our example, we can use different things in there. It doesn't have to be these particular items here, but previous education, GPA, MCAT scores, that can give you a basis around their intellectual capacity. And then character, you have letters of reference and criminal background check. That can represent the character component. And then chemistry can be represented through DISC and IDI. And the in and out of state is just kind of there. But the heart of the matter are the 3 C's and the EPAs. And when we put it all together, I just feel like it could be a very, very powerful tool to help you understand how well a person will fit within your organization. Now, how would this work in real time? And I'm almost wrapping it up here. How would this work in real time? So just to give you an example, if you said to yourself, well, if I wanted to do this, what would we have to do? So to answer that, basically there's about, I think there's 10 steps here, we'll see. You know, assembling the candidate information, determining the interview team, identifying the prominent competencies like we saw in the process. We would align the BBI competencies to the EPA competencies, and then we would have our core and correlated questions. From there, we could either screen or rank candidates if we chose to. Then we would actually interview candidates. We conduct a debrief session. We determine an overall candidate score, like we saw the comprehensive. Then we select the candidates. So we can do this through Zoom. We've hired a new webmaster that she's an expert in creating breakout rooms in Zoom and doing all things like that. So this is all, we can do this virtually. It is a way to do this. So why don't we get to some questions that you have?
Sure, we can read some. We have two that have come in, and we ask folks to submit any questions that you have through the Q&A feature at this time. We have a question here on, when evaluating talent with 3 C's, do the evaluators have to be the same for each candidate?
It works best that way, because if you have different perspectives, it's going to throw the comparison off. So you really do need to be consistent with the same interviewers. Sometimes we've done that where a person couldn't make it to the first candidate, but they could make it to the second. We've done that before. You know, it can be done. I don't like to do it. I prefer for it to be, see, the power of the 3 C's, when you do it the right way, it works wonderfully. But see, what people would do, they want to skip steps. They want to take it and change it. And when you do that, the more you change it, you can affect the probability of it working properly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question about the flexibility on the disk profile. So Angie Masters asks, so low stability equals flexibility as opposed to a tendency to go rogue?
Excellent question. Excellent question. And so when stability is lower, yes, that person can go rogue. There's a much higher probability for that, because when stability is high, that means you need more structure to get things done. So a person that can go rogue, when you don't need that stability, you can go rogue because you kind of create your own structure. And that's kind of the drawback. That's probably why I'm an entrepreneur, right? Because I can create my own structure. So that fits me. But for someone that you want to work within a boundary, you may not want that.
Thank you. Those were the 2 questions that have been submitted so far. Please submit questions now in the Q&A feature if you have them for our presenter. We did get one just popped up. We interview about 100 candidates, so with faculty schedules and resident schedules, it is impossible to have the same interviewers. I can see the value of consistency in that you prefer the same people, but knowing that isn't an option, do you feel good training for interview could bridge the gap?
Yes, I think that, you know, we can always adjust, especially if you have 100 candidates, how many are you going to select? How many would actually get selected out of the 100 would be my question. But, well, maybe we can talk offline about that, but it can be structured to as long as you have, if you have continuity of thought between the interviewers, you can get it done. You just have to make sure that everyone can be up to speed and on the same page. That's the only thing that I would worry about, just making sure that you can stay on the same page. There are ways that we can make it work. And like I said, I've done it without having the same interviewers. I don't prefer it, but I can make it work, and we can make it work where you can still make the right selection.
So while we wait for any additional questions, I know in the registration process, we did get quite a few questions about virtual interviewing. And could you speak a little bit about that, Keith, in terms of how you can apply this model, or if there's any impact of applying this model in a virtual setting while you interview candidates?
Yeah. I think it's, an interview is sitting down with the person and talking. So virtually, that's what we do. We're not talking about on-the-job training or on the job interview where you actually have them conduct different tasks. It's not testing. It's really face-to-face interaction. I think it would be better. You got to have video. I wouldn't want to do it without video. I would want to be able to see that person. But I think it could easily translate to virtual because we're sitting down, we're talking, we can see each other, we can ask you questions, we can see your facial expressions and things of that nature, and see how you look and how you act, and we can see that. So to me, it's easily transferable to a virtual setting. And then also with the power of Zoom and you can create the breakout rooms and things of that nature. It's easily transferable.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
While we wait for any remaining questions, we're going to put up a poll to get a sense of if individuals are interested in understanding this model and how it can work for their particular program. So to all our participants, if you could take a few seconds to answer this poll, I'm going to launch it now. Great, and while we wait for the final polling to come in, just another few seconds, just want to put out a final call for any questions to Keith. Please feel free to submit them through the Q&A feature. Well, Keith, I think that's it for all the questions. Did you want to end with any final notes?
I think I'm all talked out. I gave you what I had.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the information shared today. And thank you to everybody who joined us. The webinar recording and PowerPoint presentation will be posted on the AOGME's webinars webpage soon. If you have any questions or want to learn more about the AOGME's webinars, please visit acom.org/AOGME or email us at aogme@acom.org. With that, we'll end the meeting and wish you all a great evening.
Thank you.